According to a 2022 Investopedia article by Investopedia's editor-in-chief, Caleb Silver, in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, 8.8 million jobs were lost, 8 million homes were foreclosed, $19.2 trillion in household wealth, and $7.4 trillion in stock wealth had vanished virtually overnight. The 2008 financial crash, also known as the Great Recession, was the worst economic catastrophe since the Great Depression. Unfortunately, American bankers took full advantage of everyday Americans like you in order to continue to reel in more profits. Despite the egregious and reckless behavior from Wall Street that ultimately led to the decimation of the U.S. economy and almost the entire global market, banks barely paid the price for their actions. In fact, at the end of the day, it was everyday Americans like you who were left to pick up the pieces of their lives after losing their jobs and their homes. We begin with the mortgage-backed security, which ushered in a new era for American banking starting in the 1970s. Banks had now had a way to take the Americans that wanted to buy homes and attract investors using the home loans they were giving to those Americans. Essentially, home loans were pooled into huge assets that could now be turned into billions of dollars. However, in due time, these assets were filled with riskier and riskier mortgages that would eventually default. That is, people would fail to pay off their loans. Despite this risk, banks doubled down on their investments willingly in order to sustain their profits, but only manifested a housing crisis into an economic catastrophe on a world stage. Thus, the 2008 financial crash was a result of years of unregulated subprime loan lending that positioned the American economy face to face with a housing market bubble that rendered trillions in assets effectively worthless. According to a 2022 article by Investopedia's editor-in-chief, Caleb Silver, mortgage-backed securities came into use after Congress passed the Housing and Urban Development Act in 1968. This new piece of legislation created the Government National Mortgage Association, also known as Ginnie Mae, which allowed banks to sell off their mortgages to third-party investors. Essentially, home loans were pooled together into assets that were backed by the money Americans were paying to the banks to pay off their loans. This provided a huge expansion in investment opportunities for Wall Street. As the economy grew and more people bought homes, the popularity of the mortgage-backed security increased, with bankers and investors slowly making millions and billions. According to a 2011 book by John J. McConnell, professor of finance at Purdue's Graduate School of Management, quote, in 1996, total mortgage-backed security issuances were less than $500 million, and private label offerings accounted for 10% of the total. However, quote, 2 years later, mortgage-backed security issuances had more than doubled to more than $1 trillion, and private label offerings had increased by roughly a factor of 4. Mortgage-backed securities had proved far too profitable for bankers, leading to a period of overdrive lending in the early 2000s. According to McConnell's 2011 book, quote, total mortgage-backed security issuances reached an all-time high of nearly $3.2 trillion in 2003, as well as, quote, private label offerings continue to increase, reaching an all-time high of more than $900 million in 2006. This was stimulated by the fact that according to a 2023 Investopedia article by Manoj Singh, a civil servant for the Central Bank of India since 1989, The Federal Reserve lowered interest rates from 6.5% in May of 2000 to 1% in 2003. Because interest rates were so low, lots of Americans began buying homes, increasing home prices. At the same time, banks began issuing subprime mortgages to people who couldn't afford prime mortgages in an effort to keep making profit. Unfortunately, these Americans were being tricked into loan deals that would only serve to rack up their debt rather than serve as a quality investment. Consequently, these Americans would eventually not be able to pay off their loans and default, causing the greater assets to eventually lose all their value. According to Manoj Singh, in 2006, home prices began to steeply decrease, resulting in many homeowners owing more than their home was worth, forcing them into foreclosure. With thousands of mortgages now failing, the greater assets were effectively worthless, and the market began turning into a downward spiral. According to Manoj Singh's 2023 article, between February and March of 2007, 25 subprime lenders filed for bankruptcy. Not long after, in mid-2008, Bear Stearns, one of the largest investment banks in the United States, filed for bankruptcy and was acquired by Chase Bank for, quote, pennies on the dollar. Later that year, in 2008, Lehman Brothers, at the time the fourth largest investment bank in the United States, filed for bankruptcy and which marked, quote, the largest bankruptcy in the United States. With the market in full recession, the U.S. economy experienced some of the largest losses in the market indexes since the Great Depression. At the end of the day, 2008 crash was a result of years of unregulated subprime mortgage lending, as bankers only focused on finding more ways to profit billions. Unfortunately, they took every American's dream of buying a home and used it to fuel these profits, only to decimate the economy and leave millions of lives broken. Ultimately, however, these bankers were bailed out by the American taxpayers for an astounding $700 billion, according to Manoj Singh's 2023 Investopedia article. Essentially, at the end of the day, the only people who really paid the price were everyday Americans. Therefore, it's important that we learn from events like these so that we can prevent economic disasters like this from happening in the future. At the end of the day, people at the most risk from these events are you guys, Americans. In the words of Winston Churchill, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Thank you.